Hello, everyone. This is Elizabeth Elliott with the Office of Downtown Development. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'd love to introduce Sarah Rogers with the Historic Preservation Division in Georgia. Sarah joined HPD in February 2018 as a Certified Local Government Coordinator. Her duties include providing technical assistance to certified local governments, historic preservation commissions, and directing program activities for the Certified Local Government Program, and overseeing the regional planning program. So she's a busy lady. She received her Bachelor of Arts in Historic Preservation and Geography from the University of Mary Washington. She had several positions prior to the Georgia HPD, but she came to us, as I said, in February 2018, and she was very graciously giving this presentation to help all of our communities understand the Certified Local Government Program in Georgia a little bit better, and also just historic preservation in general in Georgia. So without further ado, I just want to do one more audio check that you can all hear me. You can let me know. Awesome. Wonderful. All right. So without further ado, here is Sarah.
Hi, everybody. Like Elizabeth said, my name is Sarah Rogers. I am the Certified Local Government Coordinator at the Georgia Historic Preservation Division. I work with communities across the state who have chosen to promote and protect their individual communities through committed preservation planning. Today we're going to talk a little bit about what we do at HPD, some trends and projects we're seeing at a statewide level, and then take a deeper dive into the Certified Local Government Program and how it can benefit your communities. Okay. So first, let's talk about historic preservation in general. The term means many different things to many different people. The National Park Service describes preservation as a conversation with our past about our future. Our nation's history has many facets, and historic preservation helps tell these stories. The dictionary defines the field as an endeavor that seeks to preserve, conserve, and protect buildings, objects, landscapes, and other artifacts of historical significance. Wikipedia, the always accurate internet source, also agrees with the dictionary. The National Trust for Historic Preservation says that preservation is about protecting the places that matter to each of us. We want our children to know these places. We want them to stand as beacons for us and for those that came after us, to tell our stories and the stories of our communities. I offer that historic preservation is all of these definitions and more. Preservation goes beyond the buildings to the people. Myself, my colleagues at HPD, and preservation professionals across the state are committed to helping you and people like you preserve places and stories that matter. Historic resources are our tangible link to the past, and personally, I think it's our duty as a society to make sure that we're not the last generation of people to experience that connection. Those two organizations, the National Park Service and the National Trust for Historic Preservation, both have important roles in leading the preservation field from the national level. The National Park Service is the entity within the federal government that coordinates most of the federal government's preservation activities. The National Trust for Historic Preservation is a privately funded nonprofit organization whose mission is to protect significant places representing our diverse cultural experience by taking direct action and inspiring broad public support. Fun fact, the National Main Street Center was originally a subsidiary of the National Trust. The two flip sides of the preservation coin, governmental and nonprofit, can be found at every level of the field, federal, state, and locally. On the state level, HPD is Georgia's State Historic Preservation Office, and the Georgia Trust for Historic Preservation is a statewide preservation nonprofit. Many Main Street managers either serve as staff to local historic preservation commissions or are somehow involved in their operations. HPCs, as we'll discuss later, are a local government's body that considers historic preservation matters in the municipality or the county. The nonprofit counterpart to these boards are local historic societies. Today, we're going to be talking about the governmental side of the field. A recent study found that 70% of careers in preservation are on the government side of this equation, either as direct governmental employees or as consultants that exist because of governmental laws or regulations. We work together often. You can see the background of this picture is our staff at HPD and the Georgia Trust staff. We try to go on hikes and picnics together at least once a year. So in 1966, Congress passed the National Historic Preservation Act.
Connie? So Connie has said that she's not seeing her screen move. Is anybody else having that issue? Okay. Still on opening page. Okay, we're going to figure it out. Your screen. Okay. Can you see the new screen now?
Yeah.
All right,
Okay.
awesome. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Thank you for letting us know.
So in 1966, Congress passed the National Historic Preservation Act, which was a direct response to the destruction of historic resources during urban renewal and highway construction in the early and mid-20th century. The act really created the preservation field in America as we know it today. It established a state historic preservation office in every state, created the National Register of Historic Places, began requiring federal agencies to consider how their projects and spending would affect historic resources through Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, and established the Advisory Council for Historic Preservation, which is an independent federal agency that makes sure that other federal agencies are following those 106 requirements. A later amendment in 1980 established the Historic Preservation Fund Grants and the Certified Local Government Program, both of which we'll talk about in detail in a few slides. So the Historic Preservation Division is a division of the Georgia Department of Natural Resources. As I said earlier, we are Georgia's State Historic Preservation Office. We have just over 30 state members, 30 state employees, with a wide variety of backgrounds and experience in historic preservation. We're federally funded by the National Park Service through revenue generated by offshore oil leases and a matching budget appropriation from the Georgia State Legislature. Our mission is to promote the preservation and use of historic places for a better Georgia. We carry out that mission by administrating all federal and state mandated historic preservation activities in the state. We provide preservation education, training, local technical assistance, and statewide support. We're also the home of the State Archaeology Program and the State Archaeologist. One of those federally mandated historic preservation activities is the National Register of Historic Places. This is the nation's official list of historic properties deemed worthy of preservation. Eligible properties must retain a large degree of historic integrity and be associated with one of the established criteria for significance, which are either association with an important person, an important event, be representative of a style of architecture, or have the potential to yield archaeological information. Listing on the National Register is an honorary designation. Unless federal money is involved in a project that will affect a listed property, people can use their private money to make any alterations or demolish a property listed on the National Register. One of the benefits to being listed on the National Register is the ability to take advantage of historic tax credits to rehabilitate buildings. In Georgia, we have access to 3 programs. The first, the Federal Rehabilitation Investment Tax Credit, applies to income-producing properties. Owners can claim a tax credit worth 20% of their qualified rehabilitation expenses back on their federal income tax. 2 other programs can apply to income-producing or residential properties. The state income tax credit for rehabilitated historic property is equal to 25% of qualified rehabilitation expenses back on the owner's state income taxes. This program was just changed in the last legislative session to allow that credit to be claimed over 10 years. So if an owner doesn't have a high enough tax liability to claim it all in 1 year, they can stretch it over a decade. The third program is the State Preferential Property Tax Assessment for rehabilitated historic property. This program freezes a property's tax assessment at the pre-rehabilitation value for 8.5 years after a renovation. In some areas of the state, this program is more valuable than the income tax credits because property values are just climbing so quickly. All 3 programs can be combined, so owners are able to reclaim more than 45% of their rehabilitation expenses back on their taxes. In federal fiscal year 18, There are 143 federal historic preservation tax credit projects in Georgia, which is a 40% increase from 2017. These projects created $118 million in wages, 39% increase from fiscal year 17. They leveraged over $327 million in private capital towards qualified rehabilitation expenses. They created over 2,100 direct jobs and returned $1.19 to the U.S. Treasury for every $1 in tax credit. A change in the statewide tax credit a few years ago increased the cap of that credit to include $5 and $10 million projects, and that's led to the completion of larger campus structure like the A.L. Miller, the Riverside plant in Savannah, and the Candler building in Atlanta, pictured here. Another program we manage at HPD are our Georgia Heritage Grants. This grant program is open to any local government or secular nonprofit in the state, and applications are available right now. We fund pre-development and development projects for Georgia or National Register listed properties. So projects like conditions assessments, roof repairs, window repairs, historic structures reports, etc. HPD will provide 60% of total project costs, and the grantee must provide 40% cash match. These are funded by sales of our Preserve Georgia license plates, and new this year, an appropriation from the Georgia State Legislature. Applications for this year's grants are due on July 1st, so if you're thinking about it, now's a great time to start looking into this program. The program that I manage is called the Certified Local Government Program. This is a federal partnership program between local governments, HPD, and the National Park Service. Our partnership is like a three-legged stool. It can't stand without all three parties. NPS provides funding for the program, HPD administers it, and provides technical assistance to local governments, and local governments do the work. The biggest benefit to the CLG program is the ability to access an additional grant program, the Historic Preservation Fund grants for certified local governments. HPD is required to give 10% of our federal appropriations to CLGs in the state through grants. We currently have 99 CLGs in Georgia, which is the biggest program in the country and something we're very, very proud of. We're planning some exciting things to recognize the 100 CLG milestone. So if your community is thinking about applying, give me a call soon, and maybe you could be our 100th. The application process is fairly simple, and we accept applications for the program on a rolling basis. There are several requirements to be in the program. NPS requires that each CLG in the country establish a Historic Preservation Commission that enforces state and local legislation for the designation and protection of historic resources. That each CLG maintain a system for survey and inventory and provide for public participation during HPC meetings. We have a couple state requirements too. The first is to designate a city staff person to be the liaison between local governments and HPD. This is to ensure that we know who to contact when there's a program announcement and to make sure that the HPC has staff support. Second requirement is that every HPC member must attend a training session related to historic preservation at least once every 3 years. HPD puts on at least 3 statewide trainings per year, and there are a lot of other outside training opportunities available. A third requirement is that every CLG complete an evaluation report every 4 years so that HPD is able to check in and make sure that the CLG is still meeting all these requirements, and if they need any help, that's the time to ask for it. The CLG program is not a competitive one. If you meet all these requirements, you get in. Like I said earlier, the main benefit to the program is the ability to apply for grants. CLGs can apply for grants to complete historic resource surveys, preservation planning activities, outreach and education, pre-development, and bricks and mortar development. Though a CLG must have had a historic resource survey within the last 15 years before they're eligible for any other type of CLG grant. Historic resource surveys inventory the historic resources in a community. This requirement is in place because you have to know what historic resources you have in your community before you can effectively preserve them. Pictured here is the Fairview School in Cave Spring. The Fairview School project is spearheaded by Miss Joyce Smith, whose father was the last principal of the school. Ms. Smith began collecting oral histories from former school alumni, and she never realized that part of the former school was still standing until she went with community members to the site. There, she discovered what remained of the first grade classroom, which is that picture on top. It was covered in kudzu and in need of immediate stabilization. Ms. Smith, alumni of Fairview School, and community members formed a nonprofit named the Fairview E.S. Brown Heritage Corporation to lead the rehabilitation of the building and to plan for its future. That group partnered with the City of Rome on the project. City of Rome is a CLG. The project was able to yield multiple historic preservation grants that were then used to leverage community support and donations. In 2015, HPD awarded the City of Rome a Historic Preservation Fund grant to develop a preservation plan for Fairview School. At Fairview, E.S. Brown Heritage Corporation used that preservation plan to solicit donations and support for the project. 2 years later, the partnership applied for another grant, this time to stabilize the building. Those two grants, together a total of just over $54,000, helped the project leverage close to $200,000 in additional funding to restore the building and transform the site into a community center and a garden. Phase 1, stabilization and preservation, completed construction in December 2018, and that bottom picture is what it looks like today. These are the CLG grants that we gave out last year, totaling just over $95,000. You can see that our average grant amount is around $15,000. As a Fairview School, these grants are meant to be seed money that you can capitalize on with more grants and donations. We're planning to award 2019's grants very, very soon. So if your community is already a CLG and applied for a grant in February, stay tuned. So let's take a deeper dive into the CLG program and preservation on a local level. One of the main requirements of the program is to establish a Historic Preservation Commission. In Georgia, we do that by passing a historic preservation ordinance that's in compliance with the Georgia Historic Preservation Act. That Historic Preservation Ordinance establishes the Historic Preservation Commission, defines the duties and authorities of the HPC, and defines the process for creating and regulating local historic districts. These are the authorities that the Georgia Historic Preservation Act grants to historic preservation commissions. You'll see that conduct educational activities is big and bold. That's because I firmly believe that conducting education and outreach in your communities is the most important duty that HPCs have. HPCs are typically the only preservation entities in most communities. No one else is going to tell your residents what preservation is and why it's important to preserve the historic resources in your community. Most residents probably don't even realize that your community is home to important historic resources. They see them every day, so they're just some old building to them. Education and outreach helps educate your community so they're aware of the resources and your community's history in general. It gives people a sense of belonging to understand how the world around them came to be. Another important one here that I like to point out is recommend designations of historic properties and districts. Let's talk a little bit more about what that means. Local historic districts are a geographically definable area which contains buildings, sites, structures, objects, and landscape features which retain a special character or special historic interest, are representative of one or more periods, styles, or types of architecture, and constitute a visible perceptual boundary of the city or county. Local historic districts are the most common type of designation, so I'm focusing on them here, but know that this process can also apply to individual landmarks. Once a local district is designated by the governing body, a certificate of appropriateness is required before any material change in appearance happens to any building within that district. Material change in appearance is any change that will affect exterior architectural features of a designated historic building, including but not limited to window replacement, demolition, relocation of historic buildings either in or out of the historic district, erections of signs, or new construction. These COAs must be reviewed by the HPC within 45 days of submittal. When the HPC or staff, if your community chooses to set up staff review procedures, review COAs according to design guidelines that should be established for each local historic district. Design guidelines are an illustrated manual which interprets the preservation standards and ordinances. They are tailored to each community and preferably each historic district so that they recognize and protect character-defining features of each unique district. And the community should be heavily involved with the creation of design guidelines because residents are the ones that are going to have to follow them once they're in place. When people are concerned about property rights in historic districts, I recommend crafting design guidelines that reflect the wishes of the community so that everyone's voices are heard. Creation of design guidelines are an eligible activity for CLG grants. These are just some of the benefits of local historic districts and preservation on the local level. We all know that these things don't happen by accident. It takes intentional, deliberate decisions to create and preserve built environments that people want to live in. There's not a single preservationist out there that got into this work because we want to tell people what to do with their property. We're all in it because we're passionate about historic buildings and we care about the communities around us. I'd be willing to bet that you all are too. If so, join us at our statewide Historic Preservation Conference. This year's will be held in Rome from September 18th to the 20th. We'll have tours, workshops, paper sessions, and a couple of really neat receptions. You'll get to meet and network with preservationists from around the state to hear how their communities make preservation work. So that's the end of my spiel, so please stay in touch. We do a monthly newsletter, and you can email me to subscribe to that. We're also active on social media, so follow us on there for updates of what HPD is working on and event announcements. And at the bottom is my contact information. If you'll have any questions after the webinar or want to chat about preservation in your community, I'm happy to help.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Let's see if we have any questions before we wrap it up. We'll ask the audience.
Thanks, Connie.
And I know that a huge majority of our Main Street programs are CLGs.
They are.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just want to say a huge thank you to Sarah, and we did this webinar for Preservation Month, and so I hope that y'all are doing lots of fun things for that as well. But please don't hesitate to ask questions now if you have any, or reach out to Sarah. She's awesome, very knowledgeable, and just a good person all around. So
I do have one question for you, Sarah. What would you recommend for a community whose city may not be necessarily as progressive in wanting to pursue the CLG designation for whatever reason, whether it's elected official support or just understanding of what the value is, but what are some steps that local programs could take to kind of take those core values and implement it in their own way without necessarily going through the whole designation process?
Sure. So I think first and foremost, education and outreach are a good start. So you can start instilling that preservation ethic in your community so your residents start to understand the value of those historic resources that surround them. And then second is try to get listed on the National Register because, like I said, that is a honorary designation, and it can help promote community pride, but also the buildings will be eligible for tax credits. So that's a kind of the carrot to the stick of local historic districts, so people can voluntarily take advantage of those programs where it's not the city coming into them and putting those regulations on.
And so I have a question too, since everybody else is being kind of quiet. So in the National Register, or when you're applying for tax credits, a lot of things state that resources that are eligible for or in a National Register district or a National Register resource. So what does the eligible for kind of entail?
What's that criteria?
Yeah, what's that criteria?
So for tax credits, it's a three-part application process, and the first part of that deals with eligibility. So that's when our office will take a look at things, take a look at the building to make sure that it meets those standards for the National Register if it's not already listed. And if it's not eligible, then we recommend you don't pursue historic tax credits because you wouldn't be able to claim them. But if we think the building is eligible, you can start on the tax credit project, and then the building has to be listed by the end of the project, so you're able to claim those credits.
Awesome, great information. So thank you so much, Sarah, for being with us. We appreciate it. Again, if you guys have any further questions, Sarah's contact information is here on the screen, and we will make sure that her information and this presentation is uploaded to our YouTube channel at georgiamainstreet.org. Okay, thank you guys. Talk to you soon. Bye.